That's where you spend a lot of money to try to buy your way into a space that you don't organically fit in.
That's a good
So
one.
it's very important, especially as you're growing a brand, to try to also find collaborations, cooperations, events, things where you really have organic chemistry.
Hi, guys. Welcome to Millionaire Brand Creation. I'm your host, Michael Banovac, and I'm very, very excited to have a friend of mine, Ron Jackson, on. And Ron has been in the watch industry for several decades now. And correct me if any of these stats are incorrect, but you kind of started off in the watch industry, specifically at Hamilton. Is that correct, Ron?
Actually, even before that, I started off with a division of Seiko. At the time, it was called Jazz Paris, and Jazz Paris was a division of the independent division of Seiko. And so we were launching a fashion brand in the United States, and then they consolidated. One Friday, they fired everyone in the company with the exception of myself and the gentleman that I reported to, and created what they then called PULSAR Time, which PULSAR Time was Jazz Paris, Loris watches, and Pulsar. And so, yeah, at that point, I became, they retained me to teach the 70 Pulsar people how to work with department stores and better jewelers.
Wow.
And then from there, I went to Hamilton. So, yes.
Wow. So Hamilton, and then you're with Girard-Perregaux as their North American president, correct?
Yes, I had a wonderful 15 years being the CEO of Girard-Perregaux, working directly with Gino Macaluso and his family and the team around the country, around the world. So that was actually certainly one of the high points of my career, along with working, of course, with Franck Muller.
Which is today. So if you can, take us back to when you were a little boy and kind of got the entrepreneurial bug. What gave you that zest to get into the industry and become an entrepreneur?
You know, I started my career at Zales Jewelers, and actually was working retail for Zales Jewelers in Chicago, which I'm from Chicago, born and raised in the western suburbs of Chicago. And as I was working in the retail store in Louis Joliet, you know, the home of Jake and Elwood from the Blues Brothers, I decided that there was more to my life. I wanted more than just to stand in the store and wait for somebody to walk in. So I started looking around to see what other ways I could earn a career, make a career, and hopefully do something important on the career side of my life. And so the watch reps were the only other people that working 60, 70 hours a week at Zales. I was exposed to them. So it was then that really I decided that's the job I want to have. I want to get into the watch business. And I've been very fortunate because I was able to find a job with Jazz Paris, as I mentioned. Jazz Paris, which was in the special products division of Ettore Seiko, merged to Pulsar Time. I was recruited by a headhunter to join Hamilton, based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Was recruited to join as the vice president of sales and marketing, which I accepted. Ultimately became president of the retail division of Hamilton. And then coincidentally, Gino Macaluso was the distributor of Hamilton in Italy.
Oh, wow.
So Gino and I knew each other. And then when I've always been a car guy as well. I love cars.
Me too. Guilty.
Yes, sign me up. Actually, a little known fact. I actually one braggadocious thing that most people don't know is I was fortunate to receive the La Bella Macchino Award from Concorso Italiano in 2007, which is the Hall of Fame for Concorso, for working with the Italian automobile manufacturer Ferrari. So at any rate, Gino was the distributor for Hamilton. And then Gino, I saw in Chronos magazine, had signed a deal to be the co-branding agent with Ferrari. Wow. And that was when I reached out to Gino and said, I think I should help you. And fortunately, he agreed, and that started my career with Girard-Perregaux, and then also at the same time started my involvement with the automotive field in a more direct way, because being linked with Ferrari, I remember Shirley Waters and I, who was also in Phoenix this week, still working for Girard-Perregaux. I asked her to walk into Ferrari Beverly Hills with me, and she, unannounced, cold call, and basically came in and said, listen, we have this watch company called Girard-Perregaux. We're linked to your company called Ferrari. We should know each other. And from there, sort of architected a very, very involved relationship between Girard-Perregaux and Ferrari North America, and then the Ferrari Challenge and the Ferrari Challenge Rally, and then ultimately racing, which has led me to other things with Franck Muller as well. So they all sort of come together. So at any rate, eventually I left Girard-Perregaux, went to work as the president of the Franck Muller Group. At that time, there was Franck Muller, CVSTOS, Box and Strauss, and Pierre Kunz brands that were all rolled into the group. And I was doing that, did that for about 4 years, and then went on my own and started my own company as a consultant. I worked for DEWITT. I did some things in another space in an electronic lighting industry. And then had a call from Hratch Kaprian, who's the CEO and owner of the Franck Muller distribution here in North America, and asked me back in 2007 if I would be interested to come back as a consultant and help manage the Franck Muller business in North America, which I was very happy to accept. And since then, we've been on a great adventure.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating to me because this podcast is for entrepreneurs, right? Young and old, people that are interested in the luxury space and curating their luxury brand. And obviously, you've been a steward for several luxury brands for several decades. And if you had a piece of advice for those creating a brand or even their personal brand, what would it be and why, if you could give that to the audience?
Well, I think the first thing that is always a huge advantage in creating a brand is finding something to work with that you're actually personally passionate about. Not only walk the walk, but you talk the talk. You actually, it's kind of in your DNA. And when you can match that with something that commercially you're trying to build, that's a big advantage. So number one, passion for the brand that you want to create. Number two would be to always try to do things with the brand that I always use the analogy, let's roll the ball down the hill. Because a lot of times you can have an idea, but it doesn't really necessarily, your brand is not organically linked to the idea that you have. And a lot of times what ends up happening is that's where you spend a lot of money to try to buy your way into a space that you don't organically fit in.
That's a good one.
So I think it's very important, especially as you're growing a brand, to try to also roll the ball down the hill. In essence, find collaborations, cooperations, events, things where you really have organic chemistry in that space versus trying to buy your way into that space. And that just usually ends up working a lot better because in essence now, when you're rolling the ball down the hill, you're really trying to control the direction of the ball as opposed to trying to lift it. So I think that's important.
And people in the space, I would assume, the watch space has seen all kinds of different sectors. I mean, even in 2020, when the watch space took off as an investment class, which really we had never seen in decades prior.
No.
How did that change your business and how did it create a kind of a fury around the excitement of watches?
There were two things, if I go back in history, because I have a lot of history in the watch industry, there's two things that really changed, maybe three, that really changed the watch industry. Number one, of course, quartz, which almost killed the mechanical watch business. That was the beginning of SMH, which I, as president of Hamilton, I reported, ultimately had meetings with Nicholas Hayek Sr. So when Nicholas Hayek and Ernst Thomke developed Swatch, that saved the Swiss watch industry, but Swatch ended up, for the first time, putting a watch on somebody's wrist that was an accessory. It was fashion. And so that was definitely an important moment that got people thinking about a wristwatch in terms of more than accuracy, but also about expressing something about themselves, something about their taste. The next thing was the automatic movements. And then, of course, when Apple Watch came out with their watch, everybody thought, well, that's going to be the death of all fine watches. I'm here to tell you that they can coexist very, very well together. As I've said many times, this one tells me something about me and this one tells you something about me. So I think that when then the next thing which happened, of course, as you referenced in 2020 was a few brands. It's not necessarily a widespread phenomenon, but a few brands through combinations of supply and demand, basically, which my degree's in economics. So I have some understanding of how those curves work and what happens when supply is X and demand is Y, and price goes up. So that sort of got a lot of people interested in watches that were not necessarily interested in them as an extension of their character, but it was a commodity, and it was something that was fun, that they could wear something expensive for very little cost, possibly even wear something expensive and actually be able to rotate out of that, or quote, flip out of that, and make money in the transaction. So that started a segment of the watch consumers that were driven around secondary market value, probably primarily as the reason to buy, and the fashion of the watch, the DNA of the watch became less important than its actual performance as a commodity. And we're still in that segment a little bit now. I think we're starting, those prices have started to come down. Some people that thought they could play that game got burned, and hopefully it becomes again a segment where it's driven by passion and by appreciation of things that are lovely and embody your style.
No, I think it's a great ideal, because what fascinates me about the watch culture is I got way more heavily into it the last couple of years, when I did see it as a commodity, and that it could be a storage of value. I wouldn't say an investment, right? Especially rarer pieces, etc. But what I found fascinating was the watch culture. There were a lot of people that were not only passionate about it, but very kind. They were very welcoming. They were very interactive. There was no pretentiousness. And it was almost a sector of something that people are curious to learn about, right? It's a great conversational piece. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I'm going to quote Gino Macaluso. May he rest in peace. He's a great man. One dinner we were having together, he says, Ron, he's Italian, of course. And he says, my watch. He says about me what I don't want to say.
Mm.
And I thought about that, and I've thought about that many, many times. And if you think about a luxury watch, is really a silent accomplice. It's an entity that says a lot about somebody's character, and you can choose different watches to convey and to articulate different messages. Some watches are very easily, are very loud and very, look at me, I'm rich, or look at me, I can buy anything I want. And then other things are very soft, they're more sophisticated, they're more generational. So I think when you start to realize, as people start to get into watches and they start to understand watch brands, they also should start to understand what the character of the brands are, and kind of what the voice of those brands is to the outside world. Because each of those brands have very, very good strengths, right? There's a lot of very, very good Swiss watch brands. And actually, Grand Seiko has also done a great job of rebuilding a brand that has great heritage. But I think each of those brands has a character, they have a message. And when you wear it, certain people get the message, and you can choose how many people get the message according to what brand you actually decide to wear. And you can wear and own multiple brands and be different characters on any given day.
Yeah, no, this is actually Universal Genève,
Beautiful.
1972. Yeah, and that whole brand went under, but I know what a Japanese company bought it, and they're trying to revive it. Is that true, or is that just is it fallacy?
I don't know that, but I wouldn't doubt it. But see, like that's a very eclectic, sophisticated choice, right? Nobody knows. Like as I sit here today, I don't know what the value of that watch that you're wearing is, right? I don't know whether that's $100,000 watch or it's a $3,000 watch, but I know that that's a cool watch, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I think ultimately, that's what I hope watches always, luxury watches or fine watches or mechanical watches, it always is it's something that people are passionate about. It gives a little window into what kind of a person and what that person is trying to show. And like Gino Macaluso said, it says what you don't want to have to say.
No, it brings people together too. I mean, your watch, which is beautiful, not your not the watch on your right wrist, but the watch on your left wrist. Can you tell?
This one.
Yeah, can you tell a little bit about that piece and the brand that you're currently with?
Sure. Well, so one of the things about Franck Muller that I learned a long time ago is that Franck Muller more than anything else, is a watch manufacturer. And I say manufacturer like if the Swiss were saying that they manufacture, meaning that like we really have an unbelievable infrastructure to make watches. And as a result of that infrastructure that Franck Muller and Vartan Sarmakis built, the company has the capability of making such a wide range of products that, unlike most of the luxury watch brands, we're not a company that has a large percentage of business coming from any one particular watch. In order to kind of drive value, it's important, knowing that you can make anything you want, to make things that are exclusive to North American market in order to separate some of the product from all of the product. One of the things that Hratch and I have always focused on is trying to come up with things that are US exclusives. So for example, we did a project with Neiman Marcus and we made a skeletonized butterfly with diamonds that's exclusive to them. That's one of their best-selling watches. The watch that I have on is a watch that we did associated actually with a friend of mine named Bill Auberlin. And I met Bill. Bill was the driver of our 360 GT Ferrari back in Girard-Perregaux days. But more importantly, he's been the driver of BMW for 30 years. He's the winningest driver now in sports car history. And the great majority of those wins, a couple of those wins were in the Ferrari with us back in 2004 and 5. But the great majority of those wins was in BMW. So I wanted to do something in connection with Bill. So we made a limited edition in tribute to Bill Auberlin, and we called it the Race to 61. Because on his 61st race, he officially was the winningest driver in sports car history. So we did a gold version like this one. And it has it's hard to see on a Zoom call, but this one is a skeletonized automatic movement in 18-karat rose gold. And subtly has the BMW M colors just on the index ring of the case. And then we also did one in compressed carbon, and also one in blue titanium. We did 61 pieces of each of those. We also now just launched and are actually waiting for the watches to come out of customs, a watch that is connection with the Formula One in Las Vegas coming up in 2 weeks. So we did a watch exclusively with Neiman Marcus. We, again, used the same Vanguard case in compressed carbon, but we integrated a skeletonized movement featuring our roulette movement. So we have a functional roulette movement that's activated by a coaxial crown. And all of those watches are sold to Neiman's. Most of them are already sold to Neiman's customers. And they're in customs right now. I believe today they're in Fish and Wildlife. So I'm hoping that they're going to come out of Fish and Wildlife and we can get them on their way to their owners. So I think part of what we do with Franck Muller is to take the amazing infrastructure that Vartan has built in Geneva and in Janto and try to come up with things in addition to what he's selling globally, come up with things that are specifically interesting to the North American market.
Can you tell us a little bit about the history of the brand? Because I know, especially in the late 1990s and early 2000s, Franck Muller was a huge, I mean, top watch brand and success. I know Elton John was a big purveyor of your pieces.
Absolutely.
And many celebrities, and it was the watch. I remember before I was too young, obviously, but I remember it was hot. Can you tell us a little bit about the brand history and kind of educate us on the timeline of what is going on with the brand?
Sure. I mean, the brand was started initially between Franck Muller and Vartan Sarmakis. They were the co-founders of the brand. Franck Muller, obviously a watchmaker, great skill and great innovation. And Vartan Sarmakis, already a successful manufacturer, an industrialist, if you will, like a micro mechanic industrialist. He was making cases and bracelets for other companies and diamond setting. And so those two met, decided to form Franck Muller, and came up with the shape and the style. And if you know Franck Muller is always extremely charismatic. If he's in the room, somebody's going, "Who is that guy?" Like who that guy is. Just, he's having so much fun. He's clearly, confident. He's not cocky. He has a man of style. So Franck Muller's DNA as a person came into the product, and so the product very early on was identified as a sexy product. And so without the the technology of today, without the internet, without a lot of marketing, a lot of trickery and ambassadors and all the things that you can do to accelerate the building of a brand. The brand organically became a global success based on creating products that made luxury watches fashion in all different categories, and at the same time also very successful for both men and ladies. A lot of the Swiss brands struggle to have either a men's or a ladies business, and it's very difficult for most of them to have a balance between men's and ladies. So off the company goes. So that the company starts, they start to buy, they bought the first building in Watchland, the original chateau, and then slowly bought more property, made more infrastructure. And now in Janto, Switzerland, now you have the original property plus adjacent property. So now there's 32 acres on Lake Geneva owned by the Sermakis family that is dedicated to Franck Muller manufacturing. In the late 90s, and at that point, if you go back in that period of time, most of the brands that are today owned by groups were independent. So watch brands were competing with watch brands based on the success of the watch brand. And then slowly these brands got consumed by either Kering or Richemont or LVMH or Swatch Group. And then the power of the group became an advantage for the brands, because the brands got an infusion of cash that at the time the brand itself probably, in fact, wasn't capable of generating. But when they came into a group atmosphere, the success of the group had the vision of the people on the top would say, look, if we dump 200 million into this brand and do this and this and this and this, we can turn this into a much bigger brand. So I think part of that part and that's actually an important part of Franck Muller's story as well, actually. So as our competition became groups, right, instead of brands, one of the things that also happened was Franck Muller, as an individual, was enticed wanted to sell the company to Swatch Group. Vartan Sermakis did not want to sell the company to Swatch Group. And so that became a conflict between the co-owners of the brand. Ultimately, that was resolved, and Franck Muller is no longer an owner of the Franck Muller brand. He's a very wealthy entrepreneur. And Vartan Sermakis and his family is now the custodians and the owners of the Franck Muller group. It's funny because those two things happen simultaneously. So it took a while for Franck Muller to actually kind of get up to the manufacturing capabilities and structure that we have today, because Franck Muller was never purchased by a large group and never had the advantage of a huge influx of outside money to build the brand. We're organically arrived at where we are based on being the brand Franck Muller.
That's to me is fascinating. And here's another question, because I know a lot of people listening to this obviously are entrepreneurs and maybe people trying to become more successful in their business. What being around those extremes, right? These watch groups, those extreme, the wealthiest people in the world. I mean, people that can afford 7-8 figure timepieces, which is crazy.
Sure.
How does one get into that world? How does one get exposed to those types of individuals and cultivate a brand awareness and or a business with that caliber of individual?
Well, I think there's a couple things you can do. I mean, one thing you can do is you can decide to sponsor things. Yeah. When I was at Girard-Perregaux, we made a decision to be a sponsor of the Ferrari Challenge. At the time, it was the 348. It became the 360 Challenge. During that time, I was attending the races, and I got to meet some very, very sophisticated and wealthy people. Organically, we were there. We would go to Mugello and present the winners' watches in Mugello at the finals, at Ferrari finals in Mugello, and you meet those kind of people. And then from there, sometimes that leads to other things, and you become involved in something else because you started in one thing and it leads to another. Sponsorship is one way to do it. I think the other way to do it is really just to try to create a product that has a customer like that is going to appreciate that. And then obviously to work with retailers you know, if you work with retailers, because usually, especially with us as a brand, like the modern brands today are very interested in who the end consumer is, and they have sophisticated registration systems, you know, so when you buy a watch, you scan this or you code this, and, you know, automatically, if the watch is sold at Marshall Jewelers, the company in New York or in Florida or wherever they're based knows that this watch was sold and it was sold to this person and this person's name and address, and everything is over here. With Franck Muller, we're really still not so much, in fact, totally not targeting and not capturing the end consumer, which is why our certificates are filled out by hand by the dealers. But another way to meet important people is to work with retailers that have clients that are important people, and then to work closely with that retailer, make something special. I mean, if I can give one example, like one just coming from Ed Marshall. One of Ed Marshall's customers is an extremely successful family. This person initially bought his first watch on a cruise years and years ago before he became the multi-billionaire that he is today, has been a fan of Franck Muller. So he happens to own a ship, like a very, very large yacht. And so we actually had the idea to make a watch that would have the same name as his ship and would have the same logo as his ship, actually built into the skeletonized movement of a tourbillon. So we made a unique piece. It took us about 6 months to do it, but we made a unique piece, and his wife surprised him with this as a gift. And I still have the screenshots from Patrick Lewis, because he said, you know, she came to pick it up and he's like, she's so excited. He says, not just excited like a kid on Christmas morning excited. Like, so, I mean, that's the beauty of also making really special things, is that at the end of the day, it can also give somebody who's kind of has all the money in the world and is kind of at a loss for what to buy next, that actually is going to feel like it really is an event in their life. You know, if you've got everything, right? Like, you know, you hear people today, I mean, you know, somebody that's moderately successful is impossible to buy for. So when you're a billionaire, you must be super impossible to buy for. Through Ed Marshall, we met this client, and through that client, we decided to be able to make something very, very special.
Yeah, it's an emotional response. It's almost garnering that emotional response, like Ralph Lipschitz, who became Ralph Lauren. I mean, he has one of my favorite quotes. You know, he says, my life was always a movie. My life was always about dreams and creating that dream and having the accessibility of people to walk into a dream and live a fantasy. And that's what luxury pieces do, right? They give you that taste of that dream that you've created for yourself. If you could summarize, Ron, a little bit about what we talked about, and maybe, you know, end with a quote or something that was really powerful to you, that helped constitute a great success in your life, what would it be and why?
Well, one of the things that's important in a long career is that you have to have honesty, you have to have integrity, and you have to always try to make transactions and set up scenarios that are mutually beneficial. You can't be jealous of people. You can't be envious of people. You have to respect what other people have, and you have to respect people that have less, because there's always somebody who has more. So I think, you know, you just have to try to find a way to never take something that you shouldn't take, and to try to give as much or more than you take. And I think if you do that in your career, you don't have the skeletons in your closet that want to come get you. And it's beneficial. I think it drives the desire to actually build something that is mutually beneficial, and not just something that facilitates a goal that you might have, but maybe is counterproductive to somebody else's goal. You got to find a balance in that, and just, you know, and then follow your heart.
Now, Ron, where can they find you? Where can they contact you? Where can they follow you? Where can they get to better understand Franck Muller if they're more interested in the brand and want to purchase pieces?
I have this amazing Instagram account, which is followed by 7 people. That's called Time on the Run. So that's me. My wife helped me come up with that name, but so that's me on Instagram. And if they're following me, they're going to see everything from some goofy outfit to a bunch of my bike friends and I posing with the stick man, and then also things about obviously watches and luxury. Frank Muller has two global websites. We have frankmuller.com, which is a global website out of Geneva, Janto. And then we have frankmuller-usa.com, which is our North American website and features our own products, some of the US exclusives. There's also Instagram, frankmuller_Genève, and then frankmuller_USA. And that'll give you the access to, the two websites, the social media, and primarily we're functional on Instagram more so than Facebook.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Ron. I really appreciate your time and your wealth of experience, and it was definitely an education for me. So next time you come back to Arizona,
my pleasure.
I'd love to take you out to lunch, and thank you for taking the time with us today.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much. I love the opportunity to talk a little bit about what I've been passionate about all these decades.
Well, I'm passionate about it too, and I'm a big car guy. And ironic enough, I just got a Ferrari for my birthday, which took me 5 years to find. So I understand the plight and the passion of how the timepieces and the motorsports come together, right? It's a marriage of sorts, and those that are in it are so passionate about it and love it. So thank you for your passion and your knowledge today. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure to join you.
All right. Have a great day. Thanks, Ron.
Okay. Take care. Keep the shiny
Bye-bye.
side up.
Thanks. You too. Bye.
Okay.